how can we restore function back to an atrophied glute medius? Well, first, what does it look like if a glute medius is atrophied?
I generally see that in like hip drops, like when we do step ups on like the blocks or in gait training. Like a lot of times when they're coming down, you tend to see that like drop of the hip. I feel like that's so standing.
Step up and it collapses. Yep. Yep. And so inversely, gait is the same thing. A step up is pretty much the same as a gait. So when you load, you're getting Trendelenburg gait, where the opposing side hip is collapsing, because essentially the only thing that stabilizes the hips during gait is TFL glute medius. Okay, those are the two muscles that primarily abduct the hip. Okay, so if you're getting a gait that presents like that, you're looking at glute medius and TFL weakness. So let's throw some ideas out there. How do we strengthen glute medius?
Side lying leg raise.
Clamshells are good for those as well. And I feel like it does work part of the TFL too, just a little bit, because that tension up there. But it's, I mean, hip flexor.
Well, so let's look at glute medius. So glute medius internally rotates the femur and abducts the leg because of its function coming from the iliac crest down to the posterior side of the greater trochanter. Okay, so if you go into external rotation, you're deactivating the glute medius.
Right.
Okay, and so it does this and this. Okay, if you go here, it's still going to internally rotate. And so in a clamshell, what you're going to get is you're going to get a lot more glute max. Because of the external rotation of the femur, you don't get glute medius, which is an internal rotator, missing that internal rotation. And then as soon as the hips go into flexion, you're missing that too. So how else can we get it?
Lateral band walks, same exact thing, but standing.
So what's the difference between a standing movement and a lying movement? I mean, why? Because in theory, this and this
are the same
movement.
Right.
But are they?
And now you've got your postural muscles engaged because you're standing. So now you're going to get all the stabilizers from head to toe and online, hopefully. And then you're also going to be working more of the opposite side of the muscle also, because as you're stepping one leg out, you're equal and opposite reaction on the other side.
Yeah. So the tricky part is with when you're upright against gravity, like Matthew said, all of your postural muscles are going to be turned on.
Right.
Okay. So your hip flexors are going to be engaged, your quads are going to be engaged, your hamstrings are going to be engaged, your glutes are going to be engaged, and so to keep a 0 to 5 degree, but if you're really trying to go after glute medius, you really got to be at 0 degrees with knees directly under greater trochanter with an internal rotation, and to do a band walk, yes, you are going to get glute medius in that movement, but the minute that you go more than 4 or 5 degrees anterior of the pelvis, bam, glute medius is shut down. Now TFL, quads,
adductors, abductors.
So the glute medius is now not even in the game because of that anterior tilt. And so the problem is the form. Can they keep the form? And the minute that they break even slightly and they bend their knee and turn their toe out, now they're not working glute medius, so you're not actually achieving your aim. the minute that they start doing, I mean, and it doesn't even have to be that dramatic. Even if they're getting an inch of extension so that they can use the muscles that they're stronger with, which is usually TFL, secondary quad, or secondary hip flexors, you've lost glute medius function. And so, yes, a standing lateral band walk is going to do it. Getting people to execute it correctly, to actually achieve the result that you're looking to achieve from it, is damn hard. If they haven't progressed from the normal progression that we take people through,
Right.
lying, kneeling, then standing, or seated and then standing. But I don't know how you do anything with glute medius seated. And so it goes back to the age-old thing of baby steps. You can't do standing work until they can adequately do lying work.
Right.
And the danger even with the sideline leg raise is that as people get fatigued, even here, okay, so 1 inch glute medius is no longer, you're getting maybe 20% glute medius activation.
Yeah, and that's usually the first thing that happens is that people
It
bring
drifts.
that. Yeah.
Yep. And then the next thing that happens is they'll jut the hip back. The next thing that happens is they'll go external rotation so that they can start utilizing hip flexors.
Yeah.
And so in order to get any glute medius activation, you have to be in line, or what a lot of physical therapists do is they'll actually go in line, so toe heel, to actually go into slight hip extension, because by the time you finish, you end up in a neutral position. So it's a little bit of a hack, but it does the job. Really forcing a neutral toe. And once they can, an adequate glute medius strength is going to be, the 10-pound ankle weights, 3 sets of 30. Once they can do that, their glute medius is looking pretty good. Then you can actually start to get some glute medius innervation when you go into an internally rotated donkey kick. It's going to be major hamstrings and major glute max, but you can start to get some innervation when you go and do other things like step ups, and when you go and do lunges, and when you go and do these other things, because it's already a big part of the muscle groups that are doing the movement. When it's atrophied, it's just going to be all quad, all bicep femoris. It's just going to be a disaster. Is there another way to do it? Is there another way to get glute medius?
So glute medius' two sole purposes is for internal rotation and for abduction.
Hip abduction.
Yeah.
It's hard because it's one of those muscles where you have to literally pinpoint. So you use it in things like a sumo or a walking squat type wider stance, but even there, if you're not putting your toes in a certain way, you're not activating it at all. So it's really hard to do anything off the mat with glute med.
Yeah. Well, and especially when it's atrophied.
Yeah.
Once they can do, 3 sets of 30 sideline leg raises with the 10-pound ankle weights, the 20-pound set.
I don't even know if I could do that.
It'd be tough.
They're going to be able to get up and actually use it when they're doing some step ups and things like that. But until then, it's just there's just no shot. Which actually leads me into one other thing that I want to talk about. Maybe this is more of a lecture instead of a question. So what happens when the hips go into rotation? So you check ASIS, PSIS. Right hip is at 5 degrees, left hip is at 2 degrees anterior. What's the what's the downside of that? Muscle spasms.
Major back pain for sure.
Yeah. So when the hips go into rotation, so if this is the SI joint, okay, so if this is the front and this is the back, the SI joint essentially connects like this, right, to the spine. And so there's these little nerve gaps that run through there. Well, if you get hip rotation, you close off those nerve gaps, and so you pinch the nerves coming out of the SI. So the nerve gaps actually get closed off based on position. And so when you pinch those nerves, you can create sciatica pain, you can create lumbar erector spasm, piriformis spasm, TFL spasm, hip flexor spasm, rectus femoris spasm, adductor groin spasm. So it can mimic everything from body language. I can't help it. It can mimic everything from disc impingement to sciatica to, I mean, all sorts of stuff. From a muscle activation standpoint, why would the lumbar erectors go into spasm? Why would the lumbar erectors go into spasm when we get an SI subluxation, meaning hip rotation? Because I mean, if we're pinching nerves coming out of the SI, those nerves are below the lumbar erectors. So is that a feedback mechanism going back up the chain? Because the leg pain makes sense. You're pinching a nerve above the leg, and so you're getting nerve impingement on the way down, right? It's like if you pinch a nerve here, you're not going to get pain up here. You're going to get pain down the arm, right? If you go here, you're going to get all the muscles that are fed by that nerve. So why would we get QL and lumbar erector contractions?
Because they're trying to correct a problem that they shouldn't necessarily be involved with. They're trying to rectify a situation that they shouldn't be called to rectify.
Exactly. And the scientific term for it is called neuromuscular reprioritization. And so what happens is your motor cortex will sense an instability and a dislocation, and it will reprioritize things down the chain to accommodate for that subluxation. And so it's the same thing if you dislocate your hip, you're going to have massive muscle contractions around it because it's trying to just stabilize whatever it can. The same thing happens when the SI goes into a subluxation and dislocation. What you're going to get is a neuromuscular reprioritization. So you're going to get certain muscles are just going to shut off, and other muscles are going to kick on into high gear. So the muscles that are going to shut off are glutes, transverse abs, adductors, and the things that are going to kick into high gear are lumbar erectors, quadratus lumborum, piriformis, bicep femoris, rectus femoris, and psoas. And so it's actually coming from the motor cortex, not a pinched nerve, or not. It's a reprioritization from the brain itself.
So it's basically trying to keep you upright.
It's basically trying to keep you upright. And so if we tie this back into our previous conversation, let's do some side-lying leg raises and try and get that glute medius activated. How are you going to do that with the brain deprioritizing the glute medius if the hips are in rotation, right? Or if we're going to go and do some awesome step-ups, what muscles are they going to be working if they have hip rotation and we're doing step-ups? Not the glutes.
Yeah, the same muscles
Not
that
the
are already
transverse abs.
working to stabilize.
The muscles that are already over-contracted. They're in an unhealthy muscle contraction.
And then that's just going to affect the entire chain.
And it just makes
Like down to the
everything worse.
knees, down to the feet and everything.
Yep. And so what good are sideline leg raises if we don't first correct the positional issue? None. You can do sideline leg raises until client's blue in the face. You're just going to get a ton of TFL activation, and they're going to end up with, a really pissed off IT band. That's
Yeah.
if you've ever had a client come in with a pissed off IT band after doing sideline leg raises, that's why. Too much TFL, not enough glute.